that's happening. And let's see the chat. Oh wait, sorry, I have like a bunch of windows open. Closing up. Let's nice OBS. Okay, so there's one person viewing. That's really cool. Um, nice. Well, hello, welcome. This is our book club on Bell Hooks, all about love. Um, and yeah, we're just going over chapters 2, 3, and 4. And yeah, that's about it. I suppose we'll just dive right into the notes that I've got. So for chapter 2, it's called Love, Justice, Childhood Love Lessons. So I do appreciate that Bell Hooks started off with your childhood. She describes your child as being the original school of love, which is, probably relatable for everyone. She talks about how, like, as a child, love is a good feeling you get when your family treated you like you mattered and you treated them like they mattered. I think that's like, that sounds like a pretty accurate definition, especially for when you're a kid and you're just trying to think of like, what is love? Like, my family matters to me and I matter to them. And it's kind of as simple as that when you're a kid, or it feels as simple as that. Um, but then she goes into these definitions of like how the love you're given kind of shapes who you are. So she talks about like reward and punishment, how basically there's like these two dichotomies that people can have, where like people describe love as like what they receive, but they don't think of love as what you give. And then also like vice versa, how people can give love, but not really like think about it in a way of receiving. um, yeah, she kind of just like talks about a lot of different things, and I'm not really sure how to start because it's not quite it's not like building up an argument. She just kind of describes like what love is. Like, she says there can be no love without justice. We must live in a society that upholds the rights of children. I'm really glad that she brought that up. Um, she talks about how most families are autocratic and fascist. Like, that I think is really true. But yeah, I'm not really sure exactly where to go from here. But I guess, does anyone have any thoughts? Maybe in the reading in general.
Um, I think reading this chapter, I like that she goes here first because it's a little bit like she says, it's kind of the source of what our ideas about love are and what our feelings or like our connection to the concept of love comes from these early experiences. And I think it kind of mirrors the first chapter where she kind of talks about, uh, how disconnected and how unclear so many of these very important concepts are for a lot of people. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think if I don't know if there's like a clear argument beyond maybe kind of stating, well, it kind of makes sense that our ideas and feelings about love are so not coherent and difficult to pin down. Look at the environments so many of us have grown up in, where we're being told, I'm doing this for your own good, or we're being given like totally inconsistent messages about what kind of behavior to model, and being rewarded for things like kind of lying about how we feel. Like, it seems more like she's setting the stage or like framing the problem with a bit more context
Mm-hmm.
in this sense, not so much being like, this is how you should act. Like, I think more of it is like, whoa, look how we're acting. Isn't this weird? With
Mm-hmm.
respect to childhood and parenting and raising kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really appreciated that she brought up children's rights and was very firm about children should be treated better than they are often treated, especially in order to be able to learn how to love people and themselves. Because, like, even just from my own experience, I would talk about as a kid not feeling loved or having problems with things, people dismiss it because I was a kid. and now I've been out of high school for like a year, and then people dismiss it because I've been out of high school for a year.
Yeah, it never
Uh,
ends. Because like I think for me, like Corin, I really empathize with you when you talk about just like I know you've like talked about like rebelling and like parents just, but it's not really you rebelling. It's just you being like, I don't want to do this and have my own autonomy. And then people are like, well, we got to fix that. And I feel like that's something that I've talked about a lot. And then people are like, well, you're young. And it just, I'm 27 now, which is not young, but it's like I am an adult. And it's still like people are like very just like dismissive around. They'll find something to be dismissive about it. So I'm really glad that Bell Hooks talks about this. Because yeah, it's something that just like really I've just like I think about just like how we treat kids, and I'm like it just like seems like disturbing and like an actual issue, like the way that like people just like I don't remember if she talks about spanking in this chapter, but when she just talks about like parents just like spanking their kids, like even when I was a kid I was like this is like really mean, like it just seems mean. And even I feel like even before I heard, like I'm really glad there's like been this cultural shift where people are talking about, hey, like don't spank your kids, like that's abusive. But even before I heard that, I was just like, this is not really helping me. This just makes me like hate you and think that you're a cruel person. And there's just so many other ways to approach this. But yeah,
yeah, especially when I was a kid. Like, I could argue with my mom until I was physically exhausted. And if any kind of like spanking or anything got involved in that, that would make that so much worse. Like, yeah,
yeah, it just escalates things. And it's like I mean Bell Hooks describes it as very confusing to the child, where it's like why is this happening? And I definitely had that experience. And but then she also talks about this story of like she's at a party and then everyone's like, yeah, like I would spank my kid. Not even spank. Oh, that's the messed up thing too, is like they're not even talking about spanking, they're just talking about like beating their kids at a party. And they're all like, yeah, I beat my kids, my dad beat me, I mean like I'm fine. And it's like, yo, I don't think you are fine. But yeah.
yeah. It's like whenever people used to tell my mom that she should hit me more, uh, because I was being visibly autistic, and they thought it was bratish. Like, they thought it was fine to say things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like so many there's just like yeah, I think there's like that quote of Bob where it says Bob and his mother were hit. Oh, this isn't a quote. This is me just paraphrasing. But Bob and his mother were hit by his father, and he stopped them from reacting to his humiliation of us, and they stopped protesting the violation of their boundaries. His father ignored their sense of being individuals with needs, demands, and rights of their own. And I mean, I guess that just seems like so obvious, but when people are hitting you, they're like literally trying to stop you from expressing yourself. But when people are expressing themselves, like they're expressing needs or, things that are really important to listen to. And so like if someone's, especially like if there's like a child, like you would never hit a baby, but a baby is like crying because maybe they need food or like there's actually something going on there. Um or even just like an emotional like development of understanding like how like what to do with your emotions and things like that. Like when people are like expressing this stuff, like this needs attention and to be cared for, you don't want to just like start hitting people, which I guess hope like probably all of us here like yeah. But especially at the time that this was written, people were like just hitting their kids. I'm really glad that that's questioned. But yeah, any thoughts on that before we kind of look at some other quotes from this chapter?
Yeah, Lua, what you said about at the time that this was written, I kind of wonder about that, like, the degree to which this was popular or not popular, because, I mean, like, reading this, it was kind of like all of it was like in my frame of mind, like, yeah, you shouldn't hit kids, yeah, you shouldn't punish them, like, yeah, the way that you're loved shapes a lot of your reality, and I was just like thinking my dad reading this would just be like, "What are you talking about?" On like all of it, right? And so I feel like it's really not just the fact that it's my dad, but the fact that it's like a certain way of thinking that it's like, some of my friends, some of the people that I've run into, it's like this is completely foreign to them, and other people, it's like, we've been said this. And I mean, obviously, as society progresses, like there are going to be more people thinking like this, but I don't necessarily even think that it's in like a um uh we grow more into it sort of thing. It's kind of in a like either this is what you think or it's not kind of thing. But I don't know if that's me being a little bit too close-minded.
It doesn't come off as close-minded to me at all. I think like I do wonder like I wonder if Bell, because like this is like the book that like kind of put bell hooks on the map, and I wonder if this, because this was written, I think in the, I don't remember actually. Let me like look this up. So this was written in 1999. I remember that when I was growing up, that people were like saying, that people were basically like saying like, yeah, we probably like shouldn't hit our kids. And then also she talks about like like positive affirmations and things like that. I do wonder if she has like helped popularize some of these ideas at the time, because I'm not sure though. Like I wonder if like she's partly responsible for that, because I feel like she says a lot of stuff where I'm like, yeah, like I know, like I'm not gonna hit my kids if I ever had any, or things like that. But yeah, I also like picture my parents reading this, and I'm like, they would be like, what? This is just like a load of garbage about feelings and stuff. And but I do think like younger generations are like, you know, are probably more in agreement with where she's at.
Your parent voice cracked me up.
Uh, so I got whooped a couple times when I was a kid, and I grew up in this weird commune, right? And when my dad did this, he was like, I don't want to do this, but I have to because of the, like, he literally explained this to me as like a little kid and told me that he had to do this because it's like in the rules, essentially in the social fabric of this huge collective that we lived in. And I was like, okay, dad, like I was all like this little kid understanding why he had to do it and understanding that he didn't want to. And it's why, I don't know, it's wild to me that was uh I don't know, that informs my idea as to why people have thought that it's okay and why they continue to think it's okay. Because if you don't do that, then you're spoiling this kid and the direction they're going in life, right? That's like the idea that I think, the fixed idea that people continue to have.
Yeah, like it's like kind of like any other like it's like seen as any other punishment. Like if you were to be like, well, you can't play with your toys or something, um, they're like kind of seen as the same thing.
I wonder if someone's like, oh, I remember this happening to me when I was a kid, you'll be fine. Like, I wonder if that's part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's a part of it. I think for me, I just had such a different experience with it, where like whenever I got spanked, I was like, the fuck is wrong with you? Like it like stuck with me. Um, but it sounds like, I don't know, because like my parents never were like, it hurts me more than it hurts you. They were just like, we're just gonna start spanking you. And I just remember like being confused, also being like, why is this like I have like this really like vivid memory of like my parents told me to go to timeout for some reason, and I was like in timeout. Also, I talk to myself a lot. Like I'll just talk to myself, like just like I don't know. I like Clark knows this. Like Clark also talks to himself a lot. When no one's there, I'm like, yeah, I can just talk to myself. I've been like that ever since I was a kid, and my parents like said that I was like telling them to shut up, but I was just talking to myself. I didn't say anything about them. And I just remember them like spanking me and me being like, I didn't even do anything. And it's like this like really intense childhood memory that I have where I'm just like, what is happening? Like, I don't understand why this is happening. And I felt like that I even have like this memory of like one time when my mom spanked me and she was like, "You know what you did," and then I was like, "I don't know what I did," and she's like, "You know," and I was like, I don't know what I did," and so for me, like, those are my memories of that, and I'm just like, yeah, that was so unhelpful, and I'm not gonna ever do that to anyone. But other people have these memories of like this kind of like solemn like this is just what we have to do. It's what needs to be done, and it's like I would probably feel like a little bit less resentful if that's how it happened, but it's still just I don't really think is helpful. Um,
Even beyond physical punishment, I don't think any punishment tends to be helpful. But then again, my own childhood experience was like regularly, especially before I was diagnosed with anything, ending up being punished. Things
mhm.
that were just the result of disabilities over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if there is like any form of punishment that makes sense. Like I'm really curious, like because like timeout, like things like timeout or like not being able to play with toys. Like I wonder if there is like a form of punishment that does make sense or if it's just like all bad. Um, I do think that like just trying to talk to kids would be good. I didn't really have parents who like talked to me and were like, "Hey, like when you do this, it hurts people." It was just like you're getting punished. And it was really confusing. So yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious to hear her more of her thoughts on like kind of like more specifically like what to do when you're trying to teach a kid something and like what's the best way to do that. Obviously, I think trying to talk with them, but I wonder if it is time things like timeout are helpful or if it's just also just like a part of this like bigger issue.
For me, timeout was not helpful, but also by that point, I already had developed oppositional defiant disorder, so it wouldn't have been helpful. But what can be helpful instead is like a non punished version of just taking a break from each other before you come back to talk about it.
Yeah. Bam. There we go. I think that sounds great. Um yeah, I'm just going to go on and just read some more of the things before we wrap up this chapter. Um Ooh, I thought this was really sad. Oh, wait, I didn't really read this. Many people don't recognize physical abuse as abuse. If someone hit their partner, it would be seen as abuse. Why is it accepted for kids? I was like, yeah, why? That's a really good. That's something that when I was like reading that part, I was like, yeah, like if you just like started hitting your partner, people would be like, what is wrong with you? So like, that's not something. It just seems like even like harder on kids because they're developing. Um, and this is something that I thought was interesting. Like, so, oh, wait, what am I talking about? Wait, sorry, let me see the larger context. But this person whose like father was just kind of not that great, and then like it's actually like just him showing that he had a hard time being loved. Oh, this is the father who hit his family. So this is the son, I believe, talking about it. What he most showed me, however, was his difficulty in being loved. All his life, he had struggled with feelings of being unloved. When Shelby described his childhood, it is clear that his dad had affection for him and also gave him care some of the time. However, his dad did not know how to give and receive love. The affection he gave was undermined by the abuse. And that just really struck me. Just a lot of these things that do strike me are on a personal note. Like, I honestly think, like, even Bell Hooks is saying, like, if my parents knew how to give love, they would have done it, but they didn't know because their parents didn't know how to show them love. And I think of my parents like right away. Like my parents like really wish they could have showed me love and they just like failed at it like really horribly and like they they kind of know that they did. I think they do know. It's like just like this really painful point where it's just like but I think I see this happen all the time where like parents just like fail so miserably at loving their kids, but they really want to love their kids, but they can't because like they just don't know how. Like they literally don't know how to express love and care for their kids because they weren't expressed these things growing up and they never really dealt with that. That just hit home for me. Um
Did
yeah.
for me too, yeah.
Any thoughts on that? All right. So there's this thing talking about how many people on death row were abused and none of them saw themselves as victims of abuse. I think that's something that's like just really important to point out because I think people who perpetuate abuse are often, 9 times, even higher than 9 times out of 10, are people who were abused. And so, trauma begets trauma. And so, like, if you're not dealing with that trauma and actively working on it, then you're going to be lashing out in all these ways that you don't maybe quite understand yourself. And so I think it was really important that it brings up people who like commit crime and how they were abused. And this one person said, not until I read a series of books for adults who have been abused as children did I become committed to the process of examining my own childhood. So again, just like recognizing that's something that you went through is really important to be able to hopefully put a stop to the abuse that we can deal out ourselves. Loving parents work hard to discipline without punishment. I thought that was great. Oh my gosh, this is another one that hit home. I don't know if I'm getting too personal, but seeing sitcoms and wishing your family was wholesome like them. I like watched Full House growing up and I was like, oh my God, like I literally wish this was my family. Like I remember like the kid would just be like, I'm angry about something. And then like someone would walk in like Uncle Jesse and be like, what's wrong? And they'd be like, I just feel really hurt. And they'd be like, that makes sense. I'm really sorry. Let's figure this out. And then they'd like figure it out. And I was like, this is like so great. I'm like so jealous of these people. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that or anything. I just was like hardcore related.
Yeah, I did. I've done similar with actually Leave It to Beaver and things like the Andy Griffith Show and the Dick Van Dyke Show, similar ones.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to, not specifically about the sitcom, but I wanted to chime in about, I really like how she brings in men on death row and the kind of connection between like the obsession that the state has with punitive measures, like carceral, like police, like policing and incarceration, and the kind of like the way that's mirrored in parent-child relationships and the way in which those systems are like reproduced and perpetuated, and also thinking about how like today most of us I think have, I really can't speak for all of us, but I think it's much more widespread, the idea of like don't hit your kids, that's not good, and kind of maybe focusing on only certain parts of this chapter and thinking about how that's kind of evolved to like get you situations where like you have abuse but you also have neglect, and if you like just remove the abuse and like physically punitive aspect and say, well, I'm not going to hit my kids, that doesn't actually necessarily only leave room for love. It can also lead to neglect or like a lack of boundaries, and I'm not saying abuse and hitting people is the only way to instill boundaries. It's probably a pretty bad way. But just thinking about how like like you hear stories about kids who are like very especially I would say young boys and men to their mothers. There's like a lot of stories of kids who actually kind of turn around and get really upset with and angry at their mothers, and there's like no mechanisms in place, there's no space in the imagination for how do you handle things like this if you're not hitting your kid. And it kind of makes me think of, sorry, this is a kind of a sprawling point, but it makes me think about how people talk about, oh, if you're going to abolish the police, if you're going to get rid of prisons, what will be left? We need these things. And like maybe seeing some of that lack of imagination modeled in family systems where it's like, well, okay, I know I shouldn't hit my kids. I don't really know how to deal with them though, so here's a weird imbalance of power relationship. I don't know. Sorry, is this making any sense? Somebody help me out here.
Wait, okay, so I'm confused because you're like talking about So like you brought up like when kids turn on their parents, and then like how like parents like don't know how to handle that. Wait, is that what you're saying?
I'm basically saying for a long time the dominant mainstream idea is need to express boundaries, use physical force.
Mm-hmm.
You need to express boundaries with your kids, use physical force. And in the more contemporary experience for most of us, I think most parents are like, well, physical force is bad, but there's not very much to come in and say, don't use physical force. Here's a bunch of alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, people are like, I guess I'll try something, but it doesn't always work out. And I'm just thinking about how that mirrors people's anxieties about removing punitive physical state sanctioned militaristic carceral policing systems from society at large and going, well, if we don't have these things, what, like kind of from an abolition framework, like
Yeah.
if we don't have these punitive physical systems, what will we do? Like we'll end up with like those families where they don't hit their kids. And it's not necessarily that direct, but I think there's like a similar lack of imagination on both scales.
No, that is such a good connection to point out how like people like can understand that like being punitive is wrong, but they have no idea like what to replace that with, which is actually just being in touch with your emotions and being able to talk with people and be empathetic. And then that totally translates to like the prison industrial complex where people are like, I just don't know what else to do. Like all we've known is punitive uh justice, or that's not like a good term, but you know what I mean? Like it's punitive recourse. It's like, what do we do instead of that? It's like, well, you do restorative justice instead. And people are like, I like have never seen that, so it's like actually like terrifying to them because they can't even picture it. So that's a really good connection to make, and I wonder that's probably why she brought that up. I didn't really connect that. I was just thinking of just like abuse and like growing up and the abuse that how abuse affects you into adulthood, but also like that's a really good connection to make. Yeah.
Thanks. I also wanted to thank, sorry, Jiginox. What's your name? Help me out.
Oh,
I just wanted
it's
to thank you
actually
for kind of highlighting the
Corin.
degree to which, oh, Corin, yeah. Thanks for like highlighting the degree to which a lot of these kind of methods and kind of punitive measures are like applied at policing things like disabled people and like upholding ableism and obviously a whole bunch of other sets of oppression too. But yeah, thanks for highlighting that.
Another way that it was really tying in, which is something I run into a lot in neurodivergent spaces, which is when you're around a lot of neurodivergent people, there's some ways it's easier than dealing with neurotypicals, but the way it's harder is we are so used to being excluded, being traumatized, and having so many different unhealthy coping mechanisms for trauma that they all end up rubbing up against each other, and we often don't know how to handle conflict in those spaces without just re-traumatizing each other again and again.
Yeah, and I want to say like I don't think most people know how to handle conflict. Like it's actually like really just like wild to think about. Like I growing up, I was pretty much just punished. Things were rarely explained to me, so it was just like actually confusing. I like so many memories of like genuinely just like being confused, not realizing that I was hurting people when I would have liked to know, so I could have stopped doing that behavior. And then just like carrying that into my adult life, into my friendships growing up and into my adult life, and then being like, I need to work at communicating. I need to understand my trauma, and like not having access to therapy for a few years, and then just like googling stuff, like watching YouTube videos, and then like learning about all these things through just like desperation and just like looking up stuff on YouTube. I was like, oh, like I have like an anxious attachment style, and that often makes me pretty empathetic, but here are these issues. Here are the, just all this stuff where I'm like, I'm so glad that I know this about myself. And then in addition to just like just communicating, like Tove and I have read nonviolent communication, or at least parts of it, just like talking about how to communicate without being violent, like, is just like kind of just like mind-boggling, because it's just like, because people just like have these emotions, and so they're like, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. Learning how to talk about those in a non-violent way intentionally, it's a lot. No one ever taught me that, and a lot, like, based on interactions with the rest of the world, I know that a lot of people, when conflict happens, have no idea how to go about it in a way that's not going to like re-traumatize people. And I'm like, that's kind of like a good chunk of society, and I'm just like, wow, that's an issue. It's such a massive issue, because we can't even talk with each other when we're hurt, and we're also hurt all the time because the society fucking sucks. So it's just like, wow, that's wild to me. Anyways, I feel like I just ranted a lot. Any
Yeah,
thoughts
I kind of think about this as being like, we are developing, as individuals, we develop our own sciences of like self-care, and you have to stay constantly motivated even though you're the only scientist in your domain, in a way. And you look across this whole, like, let's say, American culture, and you talk to anybody who, say, stock shelves, they are all going to speak the same language, and they're all going to know how to stock shelves in the effective way to stock shelves. And we don't have a central, like, knowledge or effective culture base for self-care, right? Like cognitive and mental health self-care. There are sciences of that, but on an individual level, it's not in practice still. It's like you need to pay for it.
Because here's the thing,
we'd probably revolt.
Because you would revolt because you're like, I don't want to work 5 days a week, 40 hours. Like, I can't like be happy. Like, it's hard to sustain my literal like mental health working that much all the time. And you know what I'm like, this is also like, I think this is like, because like, this is like why I think like capitalism and like another way that like disabilities ties in, because like all these disabled people are like, I actually need like special like there's like certain things that like I particularly need as I'm speaking on like that, in the voice, like disabled people need specific things. And then people are like, oh, like, well, I don't even get that help, so like why should we give you that help? And it's like, actually, everyone should just be getting this help. Everyone should be living in a society that's just not so hard on people, like, period. So, okay, also this is kind of random, but like we literally, like, like how there's like the Jetsons and stuff, and they're like, oh, in the future we're gonna like have all this technology and like life is gonna be easy. And it's like, well, we're here, we are in that future, and look at us. Instead of it being like the Jetsons, it's literally like Blade Runner, where like they're in the future, they're in this cyberpunk future, they have all the technology, and everyone's fucking miserable. So, we could make
super rich people are flying penis-shaped rockets into the lower atmosphere, or upper atmosphere.
Like, what is
that's as good as we're doing, right?
It's like we have the technology to literally live in a utopia. Let's fucking do it. What is stopping us? Capitalism. Anyways, I don't even think that's what Bellix was talking about, but yeah. Any thoughts before we move on to chapter 3? Honesty be true to love.
I had
hungry. That's all. That's my thought.
Oh wait, was that you, Jeremy, saying that?
Sorry, that was me, Clark.
Clark, what did you just say?
Sorry, I just said my only thought on that is those rich people make me hungry. And my
yeah.
That's all I was gonna say.
I had a comment based on what Tovio said of like, there are people who are specialists in these areas of like, self-care and like understanding communication and conflict. And I had a weird thought of like, oh, what if like part of primary school or like public education was like learning about communication and thoughts, and like that's kind of like that feels really really hunky dory, kind of weird to say, but like I don't know. It's like, oh, there's specialists in these, like there's specialists of science, and then you learn basic science in school. So like, is there like a, I don't know, that might be a thing.
Yeah, I went to this public school in Michigan, and Michigan used to have an amazing education system. And I literally took a peer listening class and became a peer counselor in high school. Like, I thought, oh yeah, probably every school does this, right? Turns out that's not the case. Yeah. I look back at my school, and it was really special, and it was like a public school in a poorer community, and I don't know how it ended up that way, but I think those things should be, yeah, like those should be basic skills taught, and they should be taught with depth, right? In the same way like US history should be taught with depth, not like, oh, it's George Washington crossing the Potomac. Wow, that's interesting. Like all of this stuff needs to be taught with depth, and I kind of think it's not generally, right? You have to go to a specialist. You have to learn it specially.
Right.
Of schools teach anything with depth. I don't.
I was. Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
Sorry, it's also that my connection seems to be pretty bad. So every now and again it cuts out, so I don't know who's talking. So apologies if I accidentally talk over someone. I have a background in teaching, and I did like a bunch of courses to teach in primary school. And something I agree absolutely, Corin, when you were saying the educational system globally, because it's all pretty much the same. It's kind of mirrors when we talk about you can't fix the system from inside itself. You have to dismantle the system and replace it. Because a lot of the time, I would go to lectures. This was when there was the theory part, and then we go and do placements. We'd actually assist teachers on site in the school. And all the time we were doing lectures, it was all this wonderful theory about how we can incentivize learning, differentiate on the basis of needs, and all these things. But they were always, it felt like they were trying to shove something really good into a system that could not accommodate it. Because it's like, of course, you'll have to do this while still remembering the curriculum. And you'll have to keep to that curriculum, which the school sets for you, and the school is told what curriculum to have by the government or a department of the government. And so you'd have this wonderful whiplash of going to all these lectures and being really, emboldened and inspired, and then you would get to the school and realize you can do absolutely nothing of everything that they have told you should be doing as an effective practitioner. And often when you try to do those things, the teachers who were on site and had been with these kids for several years already would just say to you, look, you can't do it. Just that child who is autistic, just give them their headphones, give them their little screen so they can't get distracted, and then give them the same identical worksheet that you're giving to the other 20 kids. And then, hope for the best. And that's why I'm not in education anymore. that's my.
And that's why I have school trauma.
Yep. It's like, it's yeah, I 100% agree. These are all things that should be part of an educational system, but in the current one that we have, I can't see it happening, because it's still basically based on the Victorian idea that you need to prepare the kids to be little workers that go to the factory. When they're like, what factories? what kind, what, like this whole mentality of like, put you the fact that the desks are in rows and they're all facing the teacher. It's basically like it's the foreman at the workplace, and they start off at the desk and then they go to the spinning jenny or whatever it is. It's like it's for a world that it shouldn't have been that way at the time, and it's now for a world that doesn't even exist anymore. I'm sorry, I'm getting. Sorry, I'll shut up.
I
I
appreciate.
have to say, yeah, as someone who's still in education, I very much vibe with everything that you're saying. And like what I wanted to bring up about it too is that like the part in All About Love, which talks about this, is like you know, the way that people approach their job and how much they love their job impacts how much they're capable of loving other people and you know everything else around them. And I was like, that part really vibes with me because, you know, the thing you're talking about like being taught and encouraged to use a bunch of stuff that you can't actually implement, that's like a literal monthly occurrence is that you learn this stuff, you're trying to implement it, it doesn't work, and you just get more frustrated, right? And it's like, it's
Exactly.
been that way for me in this job, but like I've had other jobs where it's like, it is that way for a little while, and you find that you can change things and adapt things, and things aren't so rigid, right? And I feel like that like really did have a profound impact on the way that I viewed other relationships. Um, out to me.
Yeah, so we're gonna go on to just chapter 3. We actually have a lot to go over still, so we'll see if we can get to all of it. But oh, this is about honesty and truth. I also really vibed with this chapter. Since we're running out of time, maybe I'll just talk about it like an overview, and then people can say their thoughts on anything that stood out to them in the chapter. But just how she's talking about how, like, as a kid, you're told not to lie, and then you're like, okay, cool. And then she talks about how, like, so many people have this memory where they're like actually like bravely being honest, and then the parents or adult or someone is like, actually, you can't just say that, and you're like, wait, but it's honest. And I feel like I still actually like go through things like this, like trying to like figure out how to always just be honest about how I feel. Like I just try to, you know, like not like in a mean way, but just being like, this is how I feel. Like I actually don't want to do this. Like sometimes like hanging out with people because like I'll feel like exhausted, not because of them or anything, but like just being like, I don't want to do this right now. And instead of saying like yes to things, or like if someone asks if I, oh gosh, it's like really hard when people like ask what I think about the art they make if I actually don't like it. Like that one's brutal, but I'm also just like, well, how do I say this in a way that's honest but without of course being mean? Like, but I don't know, I think it is really important to be honest about how you feel, and if everyone can do that, then we can actually like talk to each other about our needs, talk to each other about what we want and who we are. And yeah, I really hate how like society, there's like this like paradox where it's like actually you're not supposed to really talk about being honest if it makes people feel uncomfortable. And I also like how she brings up when people ask like, how are you? And then you actually say like, you're not supposed to really say how you are. That's another one where I'm just like, I just say how I am. I don't like do the whole story, but I'll be like, oh, I'm not really feeling super great right now. And then if people ask more, then I'll tell them more about it or something like that. But that really bothers me though. Like in our culture, we're like, how are you? And then if you give them a real answer, like, yeah, I feel awful because this thing happened, people are like, oh, that's TMI. Like you're just supposed to say good. It's like I wish people would just say hi in our culture instead of asking how you are, but then not wanting a genuine answer. But yeah, those are some of the things that stood out to me. And yeah, I guess let's just kind of like talk about things that stood out to you all in general, and we'll see if we hit all the points.
Yeah, one thing that stood out to me was that, like, you know, they were, or she was bringing up how you just have to figure out as a kid that it's a better idea to lie than tell the truth, despite what you're being told.
Yeah.
And it brought to mind like this one incident where I was mad at my dad. I hid his laptop, And I like hid it in a really good place where he couldn't find it, and he like called all of me and my siblings and like talked to us one by one, tried to badger us until he found it. He never found it, and eventually I like yeah, I know, right? But I dug it out and gave it back to him after whatever the thing that it was that he was mad about or I was mad about after it passed away. And my siblings came back to me and they were all like, "Wow, you got really good at lying." And I was like, "Huh." This is what it was supposed to happen. Like, so yeah, that stuck with me, and I was like, yeah, this is like pretty much everything that I learned about telling the truth was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because like I feel like I haven't. So like when Bell Hooks talks about how like when people lied when they were kids and they would get good at it or like enjoy it, I never had those moments because when I was a kid, people would accuse me of lying when I was actually just maybe wrong about something or mistaken. Because I think as a kid, like you think things that are untrue, but that's not actually like a lie. And so I'd be so worried about someone calling me a liar that I would like always tell the truth. And part of me wishes that I did lie like a little. Like I don't know. I wonder if there's like because also like I know Bell Hooks is not talking about this, but like sometimes like people are put in really messed up situations and like telling the truth doesn't always make sense actually, but that's not really what Bell Hooks is talking about at all. But I do like wonder about that, like when people like have parents who are abusive or just don't understand them. Like I never came out to my mom or anything because she just wasn't gonna get it, so I just like avoided that topic. I didn't lie to her, I just never brought it up, or like things like that where like maybe your parents are going to understand something about you, so like maybe it does make sense to just like, especially like if you're living with them, to just like either not bring it up or to lie so that we don't have to like deal with them being messed up about something. But those are like really extreme cases where people are like backed into this corner. But yeah, I don't know, I don't really remember where I was going with that. But yeah, any thoughts on this chapter about lying and honesty?
Uh,
You go, Tovia. No, you go. I said.
okay. Uh, I am a really good liar, and it came from growing up in places where, like if you're a target, you have to find ways of saying things and find the things to say that will appease people, right? And my mom was also like this. She was an amazing liar, but she grew up in an incredibly abusive set of situations. And I think there is definitely, I think there's definitely the pragmatic lie or the effective lie for getting yourself through dangerous situations. And there was a period of deconstruction for me where I was like, okay, I'm lying. Do I know that I'm lying? Right? And like I think a lot of people experience trauma in such a way where the lies that they tell themselves are the lies that they're putting out, and they may even think that they're being honest, right? And that deconstruction is really difficult and has a lot to do with just engaging with the things that have happened to you. But I think there is definitely a place for the pragmatic and effective lie. I think there has to be, especially when you're dealing with, I don't know, right wing truckers. You know what I mean? Like there has to be a way as an individual on the ground engaging in those situations where you're not actually speaking truth to power. You're speaking truth to somebody who's going to use that truth against you. And I think that pragmatism I think that has to be there. And I kind of wish that was in that chapter in some way. Uh, the chapter feels very positive, like almost positivist in some way. But yeah, I don't know. That's my thought around that.
Yeah, Lou, I'm glad you made the connection that was elaborated by Tovio to some degree about like the place that like the space that lying occupies in these places that we live. And it's true, it's probably like a valid criticism that Bell Hooks is only talking about is neglecting to talk about, forms of lying that may be necessary for self-preservation. And I don't know, I think there's some kind of interesting link where, people lie out of a lack of options to maintain safety and like self-preservation and things like this. And depending on how much power that they hold, that might look like, okay, I need to lie to protect myself from this actually malevolent force, on a scale with, I need to lie to maintain my comfortable position within this society. And I think mostly what Bell Hooks is talking about is the latter, where it's like, I better not upset things because I have, some level of safety and security and privilege. So I better really not go into the details of how's your day and, it's not going well because, you're dealing with a shitty medical system or a racist police force or things like this. Let's not go there. And then also on that same scale, there's the, I guess lying is basically my only option in order to keep myself safe from these things or in order to get what I need in terms of resources. So I'm glad I'm still trying to articulate that connection because I don't actually think they exist in totally separate realms. But definitely there's one type that seems to reinforce social norms, and there's the other type or another end of the scale that seems to attempt to use lying to avoid kind of being crushed by them, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I got two cents I could throw down on that. In like kind with what was being said, like often I find myself kind of trying to like reconcile some what I think of as or what seems maybe like a double standard, like when's it okay to lie and when's it not okay. Like there's certain situations that I think we're taught to see as the same that aren't in a lot of regards. But what it always comes back down to for me is like who has the power and who doesn't have the power. Kind of like I find myself, to be specific, more specific, like I find myself in situations fairly often, like where I'm deliberately not like being vulnerable, or I'm deliberately not being like really putting all of myself, like making all of myself available in certain situations. And it seems a lot like there's an aspect to that I think is, you could call lying, like there's some level of dishonesty in that, but it's very strategic. And I think it was sort of one of the more powerful things that I've learned in my adult life, because I think when I was younger, in my early 20s, I had a tendency to like think being vulnerable was okay sort of by default, and being disabused of that notion by society repeatedly and in pretty traumatizing ways. I learned to realize like, there are times where it's okay to do this, and there are times when like whatever I have to do to protect myself, or to like get to, just to not be vulnerable in certain situations, I feel okay about, because I'm trying to like wrest some sense of like social okayness from social interactions, and it's not a natural gift of mine. I'm not robust in the way that I think, quote unquote, supposed to be. So, but yeah, anyways, I don't want to talk too much. I know we're a little shy on time, but I guess I just wanted to draw that back around to like, it often helps me to think about these things in terms of like where like where there's an asymmetry in power, basically, like where there's not enough power, like you have to shelter in and protect what you have, and where there's too much, you have to find a way to either protect yourself from it or uh, take it apart. But anyways, that's me.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. There's some more stuff in this chapter that she talks about, like around, like she talks about like men, how men lie, how women lie. It's very like, um, very binary, but it's also like we're in '99, so, um, but yeah, I think we're kind of running out of time, so I guess I'll just like say that really briefly. But she kind of talks about how, like how men aren't in touch with their emotions and how they'll kind of like often like lash out at women for like this tension of like not being in touch with their emotions. That's obviously like not all men, and that's also something that I experience with guys like a lot. Like it's exhausting, and it's also just like super weird because like it's like to me it's like so obvious that like people have emotions, they got to talk about them, and then guys will be like, oh, like women are so emotional, like da 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 da. But then you see this way where like some the guys have emotions, and then like, because they don't know what to do with it, it just like is expressed in the form of lashing out, and it's like honestly it's like actually like really sad because like here you have this person who has all these emotions but like doesn't know how to engage with them in a meaningful way. And so I think there's like that also like feeds into like a lot of patriarchal attitudes towards other men where it's like we can't feel anything. People have that whole, this is online all the time where people are like talk about coping, talk about like are you mad, or as if like having an emotion is bad or something like that. And then how also it's like lashed out on women where it's like not being able to talk about your emotions, like people just kind of like lash out and end up blaming women. I've definitely seen that, and I also understand that it's not all men, or that men are the only ones who kind of like have issues with that. And then like for women, she gives the examples of like just having like some women will like get pregnant and then try to like rope men into relationships. She talks about like gossip, how like if someone's talking about how they feel, like women might say what that person wants to hear, and then say something behind their back, and then that's the gossip. Yeah, I think something that I think I noticed a lot that she didn't bring up is like just like the way that women are expected to be happy. Like there's so many times where like people have told me to smile, or they'll be like, smile, you would look so much prettier if you smiled. I used to get told that all the time when I would like go to school and take the light rail, and people would just say that, and I didn't want to get into it with anyone, so I would just like smile and be like, ha, okay. But there's just kind of like I think women have like a pressure to like act really happy in a way that's honestly just a lie. Like if women are more blunt, it's actually genuinely like startling for a lot of people because they're like, oh, like why is this woman being aggressive? But actually maybe they're just being more honest. That's something that like I feel like I'm at odds with a lot, where like if I'm not always upbeat, which I'm honestly not a very upbeat person, like I'm pretty depressed, but I'm also really goofy and silly. But if I'm not in this mode of like goofiness and silliness, it's actually really threatening to people. And I think part of that is like just women are expected to be more upbeat. And I also think like with black women in general, like black women will get shit on because there's like this stereotype of black women being sassy and da da da. And like I think that ties into this like pressure of like women having to be upbeat and submissive and kind of like be there for other people's emotions. But yeah, it's like I think a lot of that is also like kind of a form of lying, or like women, people just don't necessarily want to do that. But I think also like when you talk about like how like men are socialized, there's like a bit of a lie there too. Oh, and we're almost pretty much out of time. Sorry, I just took up all the time. I'm so sorry, everyone. Yeah. Any closing thoughts on the what those things about like men and women and lies?
Just wanted to say, I think we all took up that time together. I feel like we used it well for whatever it's worth.
Cool. Yeah, I had lots of fun talking. I won't assign as much reading because I was like, oh, this is like pretty accessible. Let's just go over 3 chapters. But it's actually probably too much to go over in just an hour. So maybe I'll just do 2 chapters for the next reading, and then like try to go over chapter 4 really fast, and then focus on chapters 5 and 6 for next time. Hopefully that'll give us enough time.
Why don't we just do 4 and 5?
I honestly did not really like chapter 4 that much because she talks about.
Yeah, me neither. I was
Okay,
like,
cool.
yo, you have a okay.
She's like, yeah, like if your job's like running your life, quit it. But like also be the best worker you can be. And I'm like, no, no. If your job is overworking you and like not paying you enough, like make sure to not give all of yourself in, like on principle, do not give too much of yourself to that job. Don't do a good job. Like I literally have had so many awful jobs where like I like was like, you know what, I'm gonna be the best server I can be. Big mistake. No one's gonna pat you on the back for being a good server. People are gonna still like shit on you. So like when you have jobs like that, you actually have to on principle be like, I'm gonna get my job done, and I'm not gonna do any more than that because you fuckers aren't paying me. So yeah.
It sounds like there's a lot that we could talk about and say about how we disagree with this and how it's dangerous for things to get co-opted. I don't know. I don't want to skip over that.
Well, okay, I don't want to skip over anything,
Same.
but I also like I kind of want to keep the train moving. But yeah, if we could just do like chapters 5 and 6 for next time. Does everyone feel okay about that? Or yeah, no, 4 and 5. Yeah, just doing chapters 4 and 5. Does everyone feel okay about doing that?
I like that idea.
Okay, cool. Well,
That's
we'll do
good.
that then. So we'll just have one chapter for the next time we meet. Since we already finished 4. Okay, cool. Well, I don't want to keep you all super late. Was there anything else? I know I might have accidentally kept someone from talking. Anything else anyone want to share? Okay.
You guys are cool.
Yeah, y'all are
Yeah.
awesome. Thanks for coming. Yeah, and if anyone's watching, thanks so much for being here. We'll hopefully see you all at the